The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
When Jesus heard of the death of John the Baptist, he withdrew from there in a boat to a lonely place apart. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns, and he went ashore and saw a great throng, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a lonely place, and the day is now over. Send the crowds away to go to the villages and buy food for themselves." Jesus said, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They said to him, "We have only 5 loaves here and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, blessed and broke, and gave the loaves to his disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of the broken pieces left over. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
So there is 2 kinds of logic at work in this Gospel story this morning. There's the ordinary human logic, common sense, prudent judgment, and rational calculation and conclusion. In this context, it made perfect sense to say, well, there's so many people here. If there was 5,000 men, and then you count all the women as well and the children, you might well have double that people. But this is not the logic that Jesus follows. The logic of the gospel is a phrase very popular with Pope Francis. The logic of the gospel is different from human logic. In the logic of the gospel, the first shall be last, and the last first. In the logic of the gospel, the poor are rich in the kingdom. The humble are exalted. The whole structure of the Beatitudes stands human logic on its head. And so in this case, the disciples were able to count. They counted the loaves, 5, and they counted the fish, 2. But the disciples who were able to count and to count the number of men, even though they didn't count the women and children, they were able to count and to make the rational, logical, human decision to send them around the area to the villages, because there's far too many people here for such a small amount of food. But the logic of the gospel was to make room for God. The French have a proverb which says, "The one who doesn't count on God doesn't know how to count. So the logic of the gospel is not simply 2 plus 2 is equal to 4, but 2 plus 2 plus God. Is he able to do greater things than we could imagine? And therefore the message for us is to keep an eye on God in all our undertakings, to bring God into our decisions, to count on God every day in all our actions. So that, yes, we have to be prudent, but we must always keep an eye on God and on the logic of the gospel, which can surprise us. Amen.
Amen.